Hey y'all, my name is Adina Barnett Miller, but I'm known to my students as Mrs. B. I've been passionate about West Virginia history for as long as I can remember, but my mom would tell you it all started when I was 3 years old and she bought me a West Virginia counties puzzle at Gino's Pizza. I've taught history in Ripley, West Virginia for over 20 years now, and I'm an adjunct professor who teaches college West Virginia history to high school students. Please join me for West Virginia History with Mrs. B, a field trip across the Mountain State to walk in the footsteps of those who came before us. Hey y'all, it's West Virginia History with Mrs. B, and if you can pretty much guarantee that your family's existence in West Virginia is because of the tree behind me, please raise your hand. I'm raising my hand and Dave's raising his hand, and so many people in West Virginia today can raise their hand because their family's existence here in what became West Virginia is because of this tree right behind me. This is no regular tree. This is a sycamore tree, and this is the Pringle Tree. And so we are just north of Buckhannon, West Virginia in Upshur County, and we are at the most famous tree in all of West Virginia, the Pringle Tree. And so join us as we tell you about the Pringle Tree and its significance and importance in bringing settlers across the mountains into what will become West Virginia. As you know, on West Virginia History with Mrs. B, we love a good West Virginia historical road marker. And so this sign says, this hollow sycamore tree is the third generation tree that provided a home for the first settlers in this area of West Virginia. John and Samuel Pringle, after fleeing from Fort Pitt, lived here from 1764 to 1767. So let's unpack that and talk about the history of this magnificent sycamore tree behind us. So they weren't just fleeing from Fort Pitt, John and Samuel Pringle, they were deserters. The United States, before it was the United States, had just experienced the French and Indian War. And so this war pitted French troops and indigenous troops against colonial forces and British forces and indigenous forces. And this war will go from 1754 to 1763. It will culminate with the Treaty of Paris, which, as I tell my students, was signed in Paris, no shocker, and was signed in 1763 and ended this conflict over who would control North America, and in particular, the Ohio River Valley. And so when John and Samuel Pringle deserted, they took weapons, ammunition, and the things that they might need. And so when they ended up in the Buckhannon River Valley, which the Buckhannon River is just right there, and we'll show it to you in a little bit, they were looking for the perfect place to settle and hide out. And so as they were coming along the Buckhannon River, they found this giant sycamore tree. This is not the exact sycamore tree. This is the third sycamore tree to grow here since the original. And so why was this sycamore tree important? This sycamore tree was huge. And the brothers lived in the sycamore tree for 3 years. And so apparently it had a hole in it, you could get in it, but the inside of the sycamore tree, according to the stories and the lore, both brothers could lay down flat inside of this tree. They could even build a fire inside of this tree. That's hard to imagine. And they said if you had an 8-foot long rail, you could turn it around and move it in all directions and be able to, they could stand up inside this tree. That's how huge it was. So you may be asking yourself in this story, well, what does this tree have to do with you, and how did your ancestors, how are they tied to this tree? Well, by 1767, the Pringle brothers were running out of ammunition. They come out of the wilderness. They head that way to the South Branch Valley of the Potomac River, and they find out the French and Indian War is over. They're no longer deserters. They can come back out in the open. And so they start telling people about this vast, you know, valleyed wilderness that would be the perfect place to settle. And so the first of which was John Hacker. And so people like our ancestors, my Kearney ancestors, which ones are yours, Dave?
I believe the wolves.
The wolves. Yeah, and so there are like all kinds of families like the Lowthers and other famous names in West Virginia history who hear about this, and they come en masse over the mountains to move to the Hacker Valley. The reason why this is important is these are some of the first major settlements west over the mountains. So let's talk about the French and Indian War. One of the things that comes out of the French and Indian War is the colonists are super excited. Hey, we can start moving west. Well, the king passed this thing called the Proclamation of 1763, which says, yeah, we know that you just fought a war to go live west of the mountains. However, no colonists are allowed to settle west of the mountains. So it's the crest of the mountains. And so technically, these people were breaking the king's royal proclamation by moving over here. There will be subsequent treaties which eventually open this up, but this was kind of a dangerous place to settle. You're, you know, away from, I guess, what you would call civilization over here. And there's lots of stories of warfare between the people who moved here in the 1760s and 1770s and the native populations of this region. And so this was some wild country. I have a friend of mine whose ancestor that was here. She was actually scalped but survived and went on to have 10 kids, including one of her direct ancestors. And so a lot of us that are in West Virginia, we show up on Ancestry DNA as West Virginia pioneers, but we can trace our ancestry to this place, to Upshur and what is now Lewis counties. And so not shockingly, Upshur will be one of the first counties that will be formed after, you know, after the Revolution, after people start moving here and they start breaking up these big counties like Greenbrier County into smaller counties. And so it's because of the people who came here even before the American Revolution and started to settle. So I feel like I owe this tree a huge debt of gratitude. My ancestors came here in large part because of the story of the Pringle brothers and the land here and, you know, how great it was here. And so that's how my ancestors ended up west of the mountains in what will become the state of West Virginia. And I know my story is not a singular story. It's one of a very collective group of people. My ancestors later on will pack up and move to Jackson County where they choose to stay. But this place has always felt like home to me. And I realized after doing research, the reason I feel such a connection to Upshur and Lewis counties, and always have, even since I was a little kid, is because this is what my ancestors called home for, you know, a few generations before they moved to Jackson County. So I want to thank the Pringle brothers for deserting, for living in a tree, and for bringing so many West Virginians, their ancestors, to what we call West Virginia today. All right, so we're going to take you for a walk around this tree because it is super cool. And you can see this one branch is almost touching the ground. But check that out, that big knob.
Yeah.
It's so cool. So you can see how this long tree, I mean, it's a huge base.
And there's the opening.
Yes, there is a little opening. I think the opening on the original was bigger. At least that's what the drawings have shown. We don't know accurately. But you could technically live in this one.
We should have had Huck with us, sent him in there.
Well, there's a fence for a reason. And if you look down there, that is a creek. You can't really tell right now because it's been a dry West Virginia summer. But that is Turkey Run. And you can see the water through there. That's the Buckhannon River that it dumps into. So they had two sources of water here. So, but I think it gives you an idea just how massive this tree is.
Yeah, and it's such a shame it's been so dry this summer. Because you see the leaves that partially green, partially brown.
Yeah.
If we'd had, you know, an actual, you know,
proper
summer, imagine next week how beautiful this tree could be.
Yeah, it's still pretty beautiful. Even with the leaves not being the most awesome.
Backside of our road marker too, by the way. This is not one of the originals, but it's a pretty old one from 1978.
Yes. And there's a much nicer, newer one up there at the edge of the road. So speaking of which, this is on Pringle Tree Park Road, which is right off of Route 20, just north of Buckhannon. Super easy to find. Driving wise, probably, what, 3 miles maybe?
3 miles, but be prepared. It is very, very narrow, and there is a, at the top of the hill, the descent is,
little,
you need to take it very slow, folks.
yeah,
I'll just put it
20,
that
25 miles an hour for sure at max. And you need to be careful because the road's narrow enough that it's only wide enough for one car. So you definitely have to take it slow because if you meet somebody, it could turn out to be a problem.
Right.
So, but I'm so glad we came here to see this tree and to enjoy it. And I'm going to take you and show you the Buckhannon River before we leave you. And I'm also going to share with you something that we thought was pretty cool. So stay tuned. All right, so we're still here at Pringle Tree Park, and we are on the banks of the Buckhannon River, which is right here. And as you can see, it's not full, but there's still water in it in spite of the fact that we had a very dry summer. And so this river starts in the highlands. It almost looks like a little creek as it's flowing through Randolph County, but it gets larger in size. The Buckhannon River, by the way, no C in there, even though we pronounce it with a C. It's Buckhannon. Important to point out to my students because they always spell it wrong, and I spelled it wrong when I was their age. It takes its name, it's believed to take its name from a Delaware chief named Buckhannon, and so that the name Buckhannon was applied to the river very early, and it stuck. And so this river was a great water source, not the greatest for traveling. I guess you could use canoes and things if the water was high enough, but it is the water source that, you know, all of the creeks in this part of West Virginia flow into as the river moves to the West Fork, which eventually flows into the Monongahela and the Ohio River. So technically the water that once flowed by where my ancestors live now flows by us in Jackson County as it makes its way down the Ohio River. So we got one more thing to show you before we leave you. All right, to conclude, I want to share this sign with you from June 2017 about the bicentennial sycamore tree, which of course this is the third tree to be in this spot. There's a poem here that I want to share with you from Wendell Berry. It's entitled The Sycamore, and I think it's perfect. It gets at the heart of what we're trying to communicate about this tree being the reason why so many of us are here in West Virginia. And so I'm going to read that to you. It says, "In the place that is my own place, whose earth I am shaped in and must bear, there is an old tree growing, a great sycamore that is a wondrous healer of itself. Fences have been tied to it, nails driven into it, hacks and whittles cut into it. The lightning has burned it. There is no year it has flourished in that has not harmed it. There is a hollow in it that is its death, though its living brims whitely at the lip of the darkness and flows outward. Over all of its scars has come in the seamless white of the bark. It bears the gnarls of its history healed over. It is risen, a strange perfection in the warp and bending of its long growth. It has gathered all accidents into its purpose. It has become the intention and radiance of its dark fate. It is a fact, sublime, mystical, and unassailable. In all the country there is no other like it. I recognize in it a principle, an indwelling, the same as itself and greater, that I would be ruled by. I see that it stands in its place and feeds upon it, and is fed upon, and is native and maker. So thank you so much for joining us here on West Virginia History with Mrs. B. We're glad to have you, and I hope that you enjoy some of our other videos that we have to offer. Thanks y'all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to West Virginia History with Mrs. B on both Facebook and YouTube.